How's everybody doing? It is so great to see you guys here today on a very warm July day. Seriously, I've been living in Florida since right before my 14th birthday, and I don't think it's ever been hotter, ever. And I was in Orlando this week, and it was so hot, it was unbearable. The only thing that helped me was a steady stream of Ghirardelli's ice cream, and that was from God to help me. So I taught last Sunday, and then right after church, we got in the car, we packed up, got in the car, we drove to Orlando for a few days, and we had a couple of days off, and then on Thursday and Friday, I don't know if you know this, but I host a conference for pastors and church leaders every year, and so we did it. We usually do it in Orlando, but so we had that this week. It is two of my favorite days of the year, and it was just amazing. Pastors from all over the country came over, and we were just talking shop, talking church, and how to help reach people and help them grow to maturity. So it was a great time. But I knew, and so we got done. We came home yesterday, and I knew there was going to be no time for me to prepare a message, or at least anything that you would want to hear. And so I thought, you know what? We should just bring in the heavy artillery for this Sunday. So I called my good friend Caleb and asked him to come. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Pastor Caleb before he comes up. He is Caleb and I met probably 7 or 8 years ago, and we immediately hit it off. And we have kind of like the same priorities in life. We love Jesus, our wives, we love our kids, and we love Star Wars. And I was just like, I met Caleb. I'm like, he is one of my people. And so anyway, that was. But he quickly became really one of my closest and dearest friends. He is one of the smartest guys I know. Like I said, he loves the Lord. He loves the church, and he is in it to really help people draw close to him. And so. Caleb is not just a pastor. He's an author. He's written several books, and he's also a speaker. He's a consultant, consults with all kinds of organizations on how we navigate the current culture as we talk about biblical values, but at the same time as people are as we talk about issues of gender and sexuality, how do we navigate holding to a biblical view of these things, but at the same time, love people that maybe we disagree with. And this is how do we manage the grace and truth of that? And Caleb is just fantastic at this. He has a unique story, which he's going to be able to share with you, which is, I think, what perfectly equips him to be able to share some of these things. And so anyway, enough from me talking. Let's welcome Pastor Caleb Kaltenbach.
Hey, how we doing? Good? What's wrong with you people? Okay, we're going to do that again. First of all, you guys came to the third service. You have no excuse. Well, you don't know the night I had last night. I don't care. You don't, there's no excuse. You don't live in West Virginia. You woke up this morning. You just got done singing songs to the living God. I'm like, how are you doing? How are we doing? See, it's better. You add West Virginia in there, and then everybody's thankful. Anyway, I'm so glad to be with you. As Pastor Bob says, my name is Caleb, and I just got to tell you something. I love your pastor. I love this guy, and I love this church. If I lived here, this is a church I would attend. This is a church where it's okay not to be okay. We all follow Jesus together. This is a church where you can come no matter where you are in your walk with Jesus. You may not even be walking with Jesus, but you are so welcome here, and we want you here. And you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to make great relationships. And, I mean, if this is a place where you've been checking it out, kicking the tires, looking underneath the hood, seeing if you want to park here, I would definitely park here. Another thing is, Pastor Bob is a great pastor. Not only do I listen to this guy on a regular basis on YouTube from the other side of the nation, but this guy right here, I mean, he loves you guys, okay? He loves God. He loves the church. He loves the Bible. He's working on a PhD. I don't know if you know that. Like, I have a doctorate. It's a micro doctorate compared to what he's doing. But he's not just doing that because he loves God and God's word, which he does, but he's doing that because he loves you guys. And so I hope that you keep on coming back here because I'm just so thankful for him and for his influence in my life. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm originally from Kansas City in Columbia. Kansas City, home of the greatest NFL team in the world. Goodbye. No, look. I get it. Some of you, you're jealous. I get it, okay? You got to know, Kansas City is my hometown, so is Columbia, Missouri. I've been a Chiefs fan my whole life. Do you know how difficult it has been being a Chiefs fan my entire life? I've suffered, okay? I've had multiple aneurysms every football season, okay? And so, am I a troll now? Yes, I am. Am I a Swiftie? No, but I'm supportive. It's not my fault that God gave us Thanos as a quarterback, and so now we're winning, and one day we won't, and people will troll me, and I can't wait. I love it. It's all about trolling, okay? So as long as you're not a Raiders fan, you're welcome here. There was one that that was here, and he showed me his drink cup that said Raiders, and so we immediately cast that out of him in that moment. I'm married to my wife, Amy, who's a counselor. She's also a muy caliente Latina, and we live in Los Angeles with our 2 kids because we enjoy not having money and paying the state all of our money. That's what puts me in a good mood all the time. It just makes me so happy. And like I said, my wife, she is a Latina, and all of her family lives out there, so we're not moving. I'm like, what if we moved to Florida? She's like, well, what about my mom? And I'm like, what if we moved to Florida? Florida. Duh. No, we're not. She's like, but mama. And I'm like, I know. She stays here. Just didn't go well. So we're not moving. We have 2 kids. We have my son, my daughter, Rachel, who's 15. My son, Joel, who's 17 years old, going to be a senior. He's 6'4", believe it or not. I know, I asked my wife if we need to do a DNA swab. I'm like, look, there's forgiveness. I'm not going to be mad. But, he's going to college in a year, and I just need to know, do we need to get another guy involved in the tuition payments? Like, because I'm going to be more mad if he goes through college and you tell me afterwards. So, let's get this guy involved now, and then we have nothing to do with him, But no, he's an awesome kid. He's in the Krav Maga right now, Israeli martial arts. His green belt test was 8 hours. He's like, Dad, you should come to the studio with me. I'm like, no, you want to hit me? No, I'm not going. I don't put myself in, no. All this aggression from 17 years, no, no. Take it out on your friends, not me. So, I got to tell you about my son's birth. When my wife and I first got married, we immediately tried to have kids because we were insane. Some of you who have been there, you know that. Some of you who have waited, you did the right thing. You waited. You had time. We tried. We had trouble getting pregnant. Finally, we did get pregnant. And we were annoying when we were pregnant, and we didn't care. We were the annoying couple you wouldn't want to invite over. We monopolized conversations and talked about our pregnancies. We lost friends. We didn't care. We get new friends, pregnant friends. We were excited. And I couldn't wait to get to the hospital. I knew what to expect because I had seen the movies. We're going to get there. Baby's going to come out pristine clean, light from heaven, underscoring epic Star Wars John Williams music or Hans Zimmer, whichever one you want. Baby would come out and would grab my finger and with perfect pronunciation would say, Father. All the syllables. Perfect. And that is not what happened. We get to the hospital and everything is going great until the pain hits my wife. And at that point, she became somebody that I had not exchanged vows with. So I tried to comfort her, put my hand on her, and she looked at me and her eyes started glowing red. And she's like, don't touch me right now. And I went out in the hallway and asked the nurse if we could get an old priest and a young priest in here because she's going to start levitating and her head's going to spin around. And I'm like, we need to get this taken care of. So they came in and gave her drugs, and she went back to loving God and others. once she had drugs. And then it came time for my son to come into the world, and the doctor comes in with what looks like a hazmat outfit. And I'm thinking, is something going to explode? Because I'm not covered. And literally, when my son came into the world, my face went from this to, oh. And I immediately thought, like, I think he needs to go back in and cook some more. Like, he came out. He was a color that Crayola had never invented a crayon before, ever. I've never seen that color in my life. It was disturbing. And he smelled, and his head, it was like all the shapes. Like, I had never seen a shape like that with all the shapes, everywhere. And then, like, he didn't make cute cooing baby noises. He came out going, and I was like, sounds like a gremlin. Sounds like that's what she gave birth to, a gremlin. And they wrapped him up in a blanket and gave him to me and said, what do you think? It's your son. And if you get to know me, I have ADHD, which means I don't always have a filter. So that's either annoying or sometimes it's fun. And in this moment, I didn't have a filter. They said, what do you think? And my first words about my son were, he looks like a turtle. When my daughter was born, she looked like a cross between a ladybug and my mother. That was awkward. Thankfully, both qualities have gone away within a week or so. But I remember holding my turtle and ladybug, and I remember like feeling like a serial killer at that moment, because there were people like, oh man, you're going to cry. I didn't cry. And then I was like trying to make myself. Now I'm like, what am I doing? I'm trying to like show off for a turtle right now. But even though I cried like when they got older, but in that moment, I still loved my son in that moment. I may not have cried, but I loved him. When I held my daughter for the first time, I just loved her, and I knew that I would do anything for this child. And you know what? This child has done nothing to earn my love. As a matter of fact, no, they've done everything to take it away. If you want to be honest, okay? They've gotten me sick throughout the years. They have taken my money, okay? They have lied to me. They have made me work. I know I'm going to die earlier because I've had children. Before I had children, I looked like a cross between Matthew McConaughey and Ryan Gosling. And now I look like this, okay? I mean, Pastor Bob, before he had kids, he had hair like McConaughey, and he would go, all right, all right, all right. And then this is what children do to you, okay? I don't know. I think I get a new heavenly body up in heaven, but I think God is probably going to play a prank, and I'm going to have this one. It's just going to be indestructible. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to walk around looking like Gru, Uncle Fester, Charlie Brown, Dr. Evil, the whole eternity, like this. His idea of a prank. But here's what I want you to know. Here's where we're going today. You need to remember that God feels the same way about you. There's nothing that you have done to earn God's love. You can't. There's nothing you can do to earn God's grace. There's nothing you can do to earn God's favor. And once you have it, I believe there's nothing you can do to lose it. If there's nothing you can do to earn it, how are you going to unearn it? Because it's not dependent on you. God's love for you is dependent on himself. God's love for you is dependent on the cross and the resurrection, which is really good news, because that's not what we tell ourselves. And here's what I know about you if you're a Christian. You're like, you're judging me? No, I'm not judging you. I'm going to speak reality to you. And you may disagree, but I think I'm right. Nobody buys into my opinions like I do, okay? Hear me out on this, okay? You are going to make some big mistakes in life. You're like, Caleb, I've already made big mistakes. You're going to make more. You know how I know that? Because you're breathing. That's how I know. Because you're a human being. Because it's in your nature to sin. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to sin. Some of you are going to get caught up in addiction. Some of you are caught up. And so here's my question. What do you do when you're following Jesus and everything's going great and you make a mistake? What do you do when you make a mistake, that one mistake that you never thought you'd do? What do you do when you look back at your past and you see that sin that you committed and you just haven't moved on from that? What do you do in that moment? What do you do when you get caught up in the toxicity of your emotions that are lying to you. You know, one of my favorite verses in the Bible is how the New Century Version translates Proverbs 4:23. It says, "Be careful what you think, for your thoughts run your life." Like, think about it real quick, okay? The majority of your life happens up here, and who do you talk to the most during the day? You know who that is? You. You talk to you more than anybody else. You know what the usual subject of your conversation with you? It's you. You talk to you about you a lot during the day. Really, you do. You're like, I do not. Yes, you do. You're a Homo sapien. You do. Okay, people, follow the science with me, okay? Homo sapien means human being, okay? If you're not a Homo sapien, talk to me afterwards. I have questions. And I'm sure other people here would too. But because you're a human, I know that. Listen, I look in the mirror, and I know we're supposed to love God and love people. And there's a sense in which I look in the mirror, I know I'm supposed to love myself in an appropriate way because I is people, right? But when I look in the mirror, I see the person that sabotages me the most. Nobody sabotages me like me. You're like, well, you haven't met my neighbor. You know, you haven't met my cousin. You haven't met, yeah, well, I haven't, and it sounds like I'm glad that I haven't. But I'll tell you this, regardless of who they are, nobody sabotages you like you. This is what I tell my kids a lot. I'm like, I don't need Satan in my life because I have Caleb. Like, nobody has caused me more trouble than Caleb, okay? Nobody. Nobody that I know. Me. I've caused me more trouble than what I'm willing to admit. And so, what do you do when you get busted, when you get caught, when you realize that you're caught up in the toxicity of your sin? If you can't let go of something you did in the past, what do you do after you make a mistake? And to kind of answer this, we're going to look at a guy in the New Testament where I think everybody in here is probably familiar with, even if you don't go to church on a regular basis, or even if you're not familiar with reading the Bible, you probably have heard of Peter, okay? What you may not have known is that Peter was not always called Peter. Peter used to be called Simon. That was his name. And in the original language, the word Simon means pebble. That's his name. His parents gave him great things to live up to, I guess. He was called Pebble, okay? Jesus calls him in the midst of his job. He was working as a fisherman. Jesus calls him and says, follow me. And back in those days, most Jewish boys and girls had the entire first 5 books of the Bible memorized by the time they were 15 or 16. And so Simon would have had that. And if you really wanted to follow a rabbi, you would have had to follow that rabbi for years, memorize the rest of the Old Testament, then you would have to memorize their teachings. And eventually, if the rabbi thought that you had what it took, the rabbi would look at you and eventually say those 2 words, follow me. And that was an invitation to do what he did. The rabbi was looking at you and basically saying, I think you can do what I'm doing. And so Jesus sees Simon and his brother Andrew, and without even them memorizing the rest of the Old Testament, without them even memorizing his teachings, he automatically says, follow me, which was unheard of. And so Jesus, from anywhere in his ministry, had anywhere between 12 to about 120 disciples for those 3 years, following him around. And this one day, they're in a place called Caesarea Philippi. And they're standing in front of this temple carved into the mountain in front of them called the Temple of Pan. And I was actually in Israel last year. I saw it for the very first time. Stood right next to where Jesus or Peter and the disciples were probably standing somewhere around there because they could see it in the distance. You'll see what I mean in a second. And so Jesus asked them, hey, and this you can find this in Matthew 16. He's like, who do people say that I am? And the disciples were like, well, some say you're a prophet, some say you're a teacher, blah, blah, blah. Then Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, hey, you know what? Upon your leadership, upon this statement, I'm going to build my church. You are Simon, you are now Peter. Simon means pebble. In the original language, Peter means rock. You are this rock, and the gates of Hades will not overcome my church. And in the Temple of Pan in the background, they had this area called the Temple of Augustus. And behind the Temple of Augustus, there was this cavern in the mountains. You can see it. You can go on Google Earth and see it right now, later on today. Don't Google it now, but later on, you can see it. And within this cavern, it was called the Gates of Hades because they used to do human sacrifices. And so when Jesus says the gates of hell will not overcome, he's talking about hell, but he's pointing, I think, over there saying the gates of Hades, do you think are so powerful, okay? Not as powerful as this rock, this statement, the leadership displayed here, and the gates of Hades will never overcome my church. And so you got to know, Peter was all like, I'm Peter. You know, you ever know somebody like that? They get a compliment, and it's just like, oh, I wish they had not gotten that compliment. Because now, like, they let everybody know they didn't just get the compliment, they are the compliment. Don't look at the person next to you, just all eyes up here, okay? And so he gets this compliment. And so fast forward to the night that Jesus is betrayed, the night before the crucifixion. He gets done having the Last Supper, Passover meal with his disciples. And then he tells them something very, very, very disconcerting. He says, all of you are going to betray me. You know what Peter says? No, I would never betray you. And Jesus says, Peter, I tell you the truth. I prayed for you so that your faith will be strong and that when you turn back, you'll be able to help other people. But before the rooster crows, you won't deny me 3 times. And Peter said, I would never deny you. I would die for you. Peter. He's still acting like he's the compliment. Have you ever been there before? You ever just thought, I've taken care of this habit. I'm never going back there. I've taken care of this mistake. I'm never letting that happen again. I've done this. That could never happen to me again. What that person did, that could never happen to me again. And then what happens? Something like it or it. Why? You're human. That's why. Run. And so, interesting scene happens. In Luke 22, verses 54 through 62. Having arrested Jesus, they led him and brought him to the high priest's house. But Peter followed at a distance. Now, when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Now, the phrase kindled a fire, that's one word in the original language. It's charcoal. It only appears here and in one other place. I want you to remember this. It may not make sense now, but trust me, in a minute it will. Remember this. This is the first place it takes place in. Luke 22. Okay? Verse 56. A certain servant girl, seeing Peter as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, this man was also with him. But Peter denied him, saying, woman, I do not know him. After a little while, another saw him and said, you also are one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, saying, surely this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are saying. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. I think the technical term for that is busted. You imagine what Peter felt. But verse 61 is chilling to me. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Let me read that one more time. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. And I think Luke is implying their eyes locked in that moment. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Verse 62, so Peter went out and wept bitterly. I want to ask you real quick, this is rhetorical, so don't respond audibly, just think in your head. What do you think Jesus' expression was when he looked at Peter? Do you think he was angry? Do you think he was disappointed? Do you think he did a facepalm? What expression do you think was on his face? Do me a favor again, rhetorically, in your own head, think about your last sin, your last mistake, or something you hope nobody finds out. When you think about that, and you imagine Jesus looking at you, what's the expression on his face? Wrath? Disappointment? Shame? Anger? Embarrassment? Love? Graciousness? We're going to come back here as well to this question. But I just want you to think about that. What do you think the expression was on Jesus' face when he locked eyes with Peter in that moment and Peter realized that the emperor has no clothes, that he's not this superhero Christian that he thought he was, that he fell and made a mistake and sinned when he never thought that he would, when he promised that he wouldn't, and he still did. And so, you probably know the rest of the story, right? Jesus is crucified. Jesus resurrects. Jesus even visits the disciples in a room, just appears all of a sudden, like John Wick, and then disappears. Without killing them, obviously, or a dog. But he shows up, and he encourages Thomas's doubt. And so the next time they see Jesus, the disciples, including Peter, they're doing an interesting thing. Because remember how Jesus called them as fishermen? And the other disciples from their other trades. Well, they go back to doing what they were doing before. I think in that moment, Peter was like, I messed up. I embarrassed him. I'm not worthy anymore. I'm too much. I keep making mistakes. I was portraying a false image of who I really am. It's over. And they went back to their trade. They went back to fishing. And then Jesus shows up. Like Jesus shows up, they recognize him, they come to shore, and Jesus makes them breakfast. That's cool. That tells me, because this is post-resurrection Jesus, and it also says that he ate with them. So that tells me there's going to be food in heaven and there won't be calories. I added in there won't be calories, because that's an assumption. You know? I like, if anybody ever been to Israel before? You ever had the fish? I had it last time, or first time last year when I was in Israel. You gotta just be honest. I don't know if this is blasphemy or not. Let's find out if the lightning bolt comes. I did not like the fish. I don't know what the Sea of Galilee did to it, but there was miscommunication between the taste buds that I had and the fish. And I felt like the fish was gaslighting me. Because everybody's like, oh, it's good. And I'm like, well, my fish is horrible. Like, it's an evil fish, obviously. I don't know. But like, I think when Jesus made breakfast, I think it was probably pretty cool. Because, dude, like, that fish needed something else. Lemon, salt. God forbid we put salt on the fish. Okay? Like, if Jesus could turn water into wine, don't you think you could turn sand into salsa? Like I do. I think he probably did. And probably had a side of it. They're like, what's this? Jesus is like, never mind, just eat it. Just eat it. You're already in enough trouble. Eat it now. Go ahead. Eat. Like, I think it would probably be pretty good fish, right? And so, it says in John 21, 9 through 10, then, as soon as the disciples had come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and a fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have just caught, which is basically, he makes them breakfast. Now, remember how I said in Luke 22 is the first time the word charcoal is used? When Peter's sitting by the fire where he betrayed Jesus? This is the second time right here. In John 21, verse 9, when it says they saw a fire of coals there. That's the second time that it's used. And in that second time, I think that tells us that Jesus, what we're about to see, he's recreating what happened. It's not the same, but he's kind of given Peter the same opportunity with similar vibes. Peter's by a charcoal fire again. Jesus is there. Other people are there. He denied Jesus 3 times, and now Jesus is going to test him 3 times. It says in John 21, verse 15, it says, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? When he said more than these, I think he's talking about like the disciples, but also notice he calls him Simon. He doesn't call him Peter. He'd called him Peter up to that point. He calls him Simon in this point because Simon was acting the way he did before he came to Christ. He went back to everything. He just gave up. He's like, I'm going back. And so he calls him Simon, doesn't call him Peter. Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Then he said to him a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he had said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Look at verse 18. Here's what Jesus tells him. "Most assuredly I tell you that when you were younger, you girded yourself," that means dressed, got ready for the day. You got ready by yourself and you walked where you wish. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will get you ready and carry you to where you do not wish. And this he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." Now, hear me out on this, okay? There are, in the original Greek language, New Testament is written in, there are 4 primary words for the word love. There's eros, which use your imagination, right? Intimate love. There's strage, which is family love, parental love. There's phileo, which is relational love, friendship love. And there's agape, which is God's love, which is sacrificial love, which really only God can give us. It's hard for us to be perfectly sacrificial and have that agape love for God, even though we can come close. We're still human. We're still fallen. And so here's what's interesting is the word choice. Because when Jesus first asked Peter, "Do you love me?" He's like, "Do you agape me?" And Peter says, "You know that I phileo you." Relational love. And then second time, Jesus asked, "Do you agape me?" Peter says, "You know that I phileo you." And then in the third time, Jesus says, "Do you phileo me?" And Peter says, "No, I phileo you." And so there are a lot of commentators that have, I think, made wrong assumptions. Like, they're like, "Well, you know, I mean, honestly," and I don't know why I sound like Dr. Phil here, but honestly, how's that working for you? You know, honestly, Jesus had to dumb it down to Peter's level so Peter would understand. I don't think for 1 second that's what happened there. I think that Jesus was testing him. Not only reinstating him, but he was testing him like, "Do you love me? Like you were saying, I would die for you." And I think Peter has been humbled. I think he's been hurt. He sabotaged himself. He didn't have a realistic view, and I think he's beginning to have a more realistic view of who he is. He's like, "Lord, I phileo you. I'm trying to love you as much as I can right now." Then he's like, "Do you agape me? You know that I love you as much as I can right now." He's like, "So you do understand. You love me as you can as a human." "Yes, I do." And I think Jesus was seeing if Peter had learned, and I think that Peter did. And then, remember how Peter said, "You know that I would die for you. I would never do that." And he's saying, "You will die for me eventually." And if you know anything about church history, you know that probably around somewhere between 62 to 65 AD, Peter lost his life for his faith. Under the Roman Emperor Nero, he was crucified by the Roman soldiers. And before he was crucified, he told the soldiers that he was not worthy to die in the same way that Jesus did. And they said, "Well, we can fix that." And they crucified him upside down. That's why with Satanism, you'll see upside down crosses some of the times. It's not only a mockery of the cross, it's making fun of the way Peter died. That's what that is. And yet Peter bore it as pride that he is not worthy to die in the way the Lord died. And so here's a guy made a mistake. He's over here, going back to the way he did everything, and then Jesus comes and he reminds him of something. Here's what I want you to remember. Your worst mistake is not your final chapter. Your worst mistake is not your final chapter. You say, "Caleb, you don't know what I've done." I don't, and that I don't necessarily want to, because I got to fly back eventually, okay? Not that you don't matter, but still, we don't have that much time. You have to beat the Methodists to the buffet. Your worst mistake is not the end of the matter. Your last sin doesn't vex God. It doesn't make God upset. It's not the last straw on the camel's back for God. It's not like you sinned and God's like, "Oh, really? Dude, what are we going to do about Sally? She just doesn't get it. God's not up there doing that. Number 2, you are not defined by your mistakes. You are not your mistakes. You are not your habit. You are not your hang-ups. You are not your emotions. You are not your sin. Jesus Christ did not die on the cross for you to define yourself by anything other than him. Period. Okay? Our culture right now loves trying to get people to define themselves as anything else, primarily anything else other than Christian. Like where you work, where you went to school, your accomplishments, okay? Your shame, your sexuality, your gender, your politics, okay? None of that is your primary defining aspect as a Christian, praise God, right? You are primarily a disciple of Christ. You are primarily a son or daughter of God. And if you don't think, and this is one of these things where I'm going to make a blanket statement, and you can disagree with me. My wife disagrees with me a lot. I'm just telling you. But here's what I truly believe. If you are primarily defining if you claim to follow Jesus and you're primarily defining yourself by anything other than him, you're committing idolatry. Did that thing die for you? Did that idea or sin die for you on the cross and resurrect? No. You are not defined by your mistakes. Do not do that to yourself. You end up gaslighting yourself. Number 3, despite your mistakes, Jesus always gives you purpose. He always gives you purpose. Here's Peter thinking that he lost his purpose. I'm Simon. I made a mistake. It's too much. I betrayed Jesus. That's going to be in the history books. And then he resurrected. I mean, he's probably got a new Peter and just everything like that. And so here's Jesus, right? And Jesus calls him back. He still gives you purpose. You didn't do anything to earn his love. You can't do anything to unearn it. He gave you your purpose. You didn't earn it. He gave it to you. How do you think you are going to undo it if you didn't earn it? Last thing is this. Jesus is always with you. He never leaves. Never walks away. I mean, it's not like you make a mistake and Jesus is up in heaven going, great. Gabriel, Michael, get in the conference room. We got to do a whiteboard session. Bob has made another mistake. Caleb has done this, and I've been at this for years, and I'm running out of ideas. I'm trying not to send the lightning bolt at Caleb right now. He's going to be on a plane tomorrow, and that's going to take a bunch of other people out. So, you need to help me solve this problem of Caleb before he gets on the plane tomorrow. God never does that. He never walks away. The interesting thing about the parable of the prodigal son is that when the prodigal son left, he never actually stopped being his father's son. Not once. And his father let him leave graciously, and when he returned, his father hadn't moved. He's in the same place. God doesn't leave. He goes where you go. Wherever. You can't undo the fact that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And when you make a mistake, when you sin, here's what I believe Jesus says to you. Follow me. When you confess, when you repent, he says, follow me. Now, what does this look like in real life? Well, for me, I'll tell you, an example of this, and then I'm done. I'm going a little bit more over today. I'll try not to go too much over. This is the last service, so meh. So like I said, originally from Columbia, Missouri, Kansas City. I was raised by 2 lesbians and a gay man. My parents were divorced when I was 2. They both went into same-sex relationships. My mom was in a 22-year monogamous relationship with a psychologist named Vera. My dad always had friends, never one monogamous partner, but they were also activists. And so my whole childhood, I grew up with my parents taking me to pride parades and gay clubs and bars and campouts and parties. And I saw just the ugliness of a lot of people who profess to be Christians, standing on the sidelines of the streets, holding up signs saying God hates you, throwing water and urine on people in the parade saying this is what Jesus thinks of you, seeing Christian families ignoring their young sons dying of AIDS at the start of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. And I remember asking my mom, why are they acting like that? And she would consistently tell me. I can still remember it as she's saying it today. It's pounding in my head. Caleb, these are Christians. Christians hate gay people. If you are not like them, they will not like you. And I thought to myself, I never ever want to be a Christian. Because if Christians are this bad, I can't imagine how awful Jesus must be. That was my thought. Then when I got to be 16, I was in high school. Another high schooler invited me to a Bible study at his house that he led for high schoolers. And I thought, I'm going to go and be a pretend Christian. I'm going to be a ninja Christian and learn about their faith and dismantle it. And that worked out real well, as you can tell. It's a great plan. Then went sideways. Because I started learning about Jesus and realizing that he was not like a lot of the followers that I had seen. That here's this guy. He was on, he had very deep theological beliefs, and he had deep convictions about how his followers should live their lives and treat people, but he also had very real relationships with people that were marginalized, pushed to the side, that the religious elite of his day wanted nothing to do with, that he liked them and they liked him back. And I was like, I can get on board with Jesus. And then I came to a conclusion about sex and sexuality that I still hold today, that God designed sex to be expressed in a marriage between one male and one female, but I also believe this, okay, that biblical beliefs are never reasons to devalue someone else. That your beliefs as a Christian should never sideline somebody else that has different beliefs. And here's the thing, okay? If you say that because I disagree with your view of marriage or your view of sexuality, that I'm the extremist and that you have to get away from me, you're actually the extremist. Because I'm not putting up a wall there. You are, not me. You see, I can have theological beliefs and not allow those beliefs about marriage, sex, gender, and so on to affect my view of other people because I'm not a creeper. That's why. These are my beliefs, but they don't obstruct my view of other people. It's extremists that say, no, if you disagree with me, we're done. Do you know why? Because you're stepping on their main identity. You see, there are a lot of people in this world today, they think the world is going to get better if we disagree less. That's ridiculous. That makes the world worse when we try to disagree less. The world gets better when we learn how to disagree better, aka dialogue. It's an old art form, ancient thing back in the day. Dialogue. Freely sharing disagreements and learning from other people despite disagreements. It's amazing. We should try it someday. And so then I called my friend Greg when I was 16, and I told him, I said, Greg, I think I've turned Christian. What do I do? He said, well, let's go eat Chinese food and I'll baptize you. Which we did. And then I was nervous because at the age of 16, I had to come out as a Christian to my 3 activist LGBTQ parents. And they kicked me out of both houses. Because they said, now you're one of them. And they turned into the very extremist that they were afraid of to begin with. And so I had to stay with friends until my parents let me back in. And when I work with LGBTQ teenagers, they're like, I thought it was just Christians that did that. I said, no, it's human beings. Human beings are dangerous things, especially when they're fearful. That's why politicians try to get you to be afraid, because when you're afraid, you're easy to control. When you have faith, you can't be controlled. That's why y'all should watch less Fox News and CNN, okay? I stopped watching because I got angry all the time. Now I don't watch. Now I listen to true crime podcasts and I'm scared all the time, but still, okay? New season of Unsolved Mysteries is coming out, and it's like moth to a flame, but I know I'm going to get burned, but I have to watch it. But at least I'm not watching news anymore. Like, life is great. So I'm telling you, like, eventually my parents let me back in. I went to Bible college, preached at a church. I preached at a church in a town of 50 people. There were 25 people in the church. I preached there for 18 months. We were the largest church per capita in the world at that time. After 18 months, my mom came to church with me. And then, like, she didn't come the next Sunday, but there were 2 elders before church said, we want to talk to you. If you want to keep preaching here, don't you ever bring somebody like your mother again. We don't like those people. And I said, well, this is a coincidence. I don't like you anymore, so imagine that. And I said, I quit. I'm leaving. I'm going to go to McDonald's. Bye. And they're like, you can't quit. We need a sermon. I said, oh, you don't want me to preach? Not after this conversation. They're like, we need a sermon. And so in my day, I knew this was going to be my last Sunday. In my day, there was a guy named Bon Jovi that wrote a song called Blaze of Glory, that if you're going to go out, you're going to make it memorable, which I did. I took my sermon I had written on fasting, ripped it up. Who cares about fasting? Got up there, preached on grace and truth and compassion and conviction. And I just prayed when I was driving away from that church, Lord, I do not want to be in a church like that. I want to be in a church that is filled with messy people who are making mistakes, who are struggling to follow you, who are following you. I want to be in a church filled with people like that, because that's what the church is. It's a beautiful mosaic of broken, messy, mistake-driven lives that God unites together to glorify him, and he rebuilds us and redeems us in his image. That's what the church is. So I moved to Southern California back in 1999 when it was popular to move to California. And spent 3.5 years in Dallas, Texas, working on my doctorate and preaching at a church there. And my mom's partner died from cancer, and she and my dad separated one another, moved down to Texas, started preaching at my church, even though they knew what I believed in. And you know what? The church treated them well. As a matter of fact, at the ages of 69, 70, my mom and dad gave their lives to Jesus. And I'm like, wow. In the last 2 years, I've lost both my parents. Both my parents. I remember last year, I lost my mom. I'm walking into church after I got in the phone call. I didn't know what else to do. It was surreal. And worship was already going on Saturday night for our Saturday night service. And when I was listening to music, I just started crying because I just started thinking, that is exactly what both my parents are doing right now. They are standing before the throne of the Lamb. And they're singing to him right now. And so if I want to be close with my parents when I worship, I'm doing the same thing they are doing in that moment. In that timeless moment. Why was that able to happen? Because there's a group of Christians in Dallas, Texas, that were willing not to define somebody by their perceptions, by their sin, by their mistakes, by their politics, by their views, by their relationships, by anything else. Because they believed that sin and mistakes don't define you. They aren't the last chapter. What would your life look like if you honestly believed that your mistakes were not the final chapter? If somebody else's mistakes that they had made were not the final chapters, what would your life look like, and what could you do for Jesus? Let me pray for you. Lord, thank you so much for today. Help us to remember that our mistakes, they're not the final chapter. They weren't the final chapter in Peter's life. He went on to do amazing, incredible things, and history is full of stories like that. Father, help us to remember that. For those who aren't Christian, Father, help them to see that your servants are not always the best representatives of who you are. For those, Father God, who are Christians, help us to remember that our job is really to trust you and to love people and tell them about you. Father, help us not to judge, and help us, to some degree, without becoming narcissists, help us to be gracious to ourselves. And help that grace to flow from your love for us, Father God, not from our love for us, but your love for us. Because when we're in tune with you, we're not going to judge other people in the way that when we're insecure about ourselves. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen. God bless you guys.
Thank you for joining us today. If you made a decision to follow Jesus and begin a relationship with him, congratulations. It's the best decision you're ever going to make. You may be wondering, so what happens now? Where do I go from here? Just text BEGIN to 62488 and we'll be able to send you this free gift. It's a book called Begin, written by Pastor Bob, and it's going to help you take those first steps on your new journey of faith. So remember, to stay up to date with everything happening at Calvary, follow @MyCalvary on Instagram and Facebook. Until next week, we love you, we're praying for you. God bless you.